In this video, we shall be going through a game which was played by the Swedish Grandmaster Nils Grandelius against the Serbian Grandmaster Ivan Saric. The game was played in Bundesliga 2024. The game is quite instructive. Let's start right away. Nils Grandelius is white, Ivan Saric is black. The game started with e4. Black replied c5, the Sicilian defense. White played knight f3, d6, d4, the open Sicilian, or the most popular response against the Sicilian defense. After cd4, white replaced the d4 pawn with his knight. Now black developed his piece attacking the e pawn, and white played knight c3, defending the e pawn while developing his knight. At this point, black decided to go for the Najdorf variation after a6. Well, the Najdorf variation is one of the most popular responses in the Sicilian defense against the main line. It was played by chess legends like Bobby Fischer, Garry Kasparov. It was the favorite of these legends. And the reason why this particular opening or the variation is named Najdorf is that Don Miguel Najdorf, he was a Polish grandmaster who went to Argentina to participate in chess Olympiad representing Poland. Unfortunately, the Second World War broke during that time and he could not return to his country. He decided to stay in Argentina, and later he became the strongest player of Latin America, the South America, and he was one of the leading players of the world for several years. So during those days, he analyzed the move a6, and it is in his honor that the entire variation, the most popular variation in Sicilian, is named Najdorf variation. Well, what is the idea behind this move? Generally, students are advised not to make unnecessary pawn moves in the opening before developing the pieces. Why does black play a6 and why is it so popular? Well, the idea behind a6 is that white wants to push back the knight on d4 by playing e5. Well, the move e5 looks quite odd at first sight because it weakens the d5 square and d6 pawn. But it was discovered by several analysts about 50 years ago, notably players like Isaac Boleslawski, who was a Soviet grandmaster. He found out that this particular pawn structure, where black has pawns on e5 and d6 in the Sicilian defense, gives black a lot of counterplay. It gives black some space in the center, and while black does have weakness on d5 and d6, he can defend the weaknesses easily without making his pieces passive. So he can place all his pieces in the center while defending the weakness, and then he can rely on counterplay on the c file by putting his rook on c8. So black has an open file on the queen side, and he has the option of expanding on the queen side. So black is basically preparing to go e5, gain time pushing the knight back, and then develop his pieces accordingly. Now the question is, why didn't black go e5 immediately? Well, black can play e5, but as we have seen that e5 weakens the square d5 and the pawn on d6. Well, we have in the previous videos I have always emphasized how once a pawn moves forward, it can't move backward. So once black has played e5, it can't go to e6 controlling the d5 square. Well, after e5, ideally white would want his knight to be on d5. But how does it go to d5? The shortest route is via knight f5, and if it is chased, it can fall back to e3 and go to even better square, which is d5. Unfortunately, knight f5 is not possible because black can play d5, and suddenly black's weakness disappears. It becomes a strength. Well, the point being that ed bf5, the support of f5 knight is undermined. So therefore, before playing knight f5, white will do well to first remove the bishop. He will play bishop b5 check, and if black plays knight d7 defending against the check, white can now go knight f5. Black can't go d5. Or if black plays bishop d7, white can exchange the bishops and then play knight f5. Black will not be able to play d5 because white will win this pawn without any compensation. White will be simply a pawn up. So therefore, the move e5 is not good because white will have a chance to play knight f5, which is a desirable square for the knight, after bishop b5 check. So now you understand why Don Miguel Najdorf, he invented the move a6. He wants to play e5 without allowing bishop b5 check. And the move a6 will be useful later anyway, because black will expand on the queen side by b5, moves like b5. So it's a useful move for future, but at present black is aiming to play e5. Now, how does white develop his pieces? In the game, white played the most modest move, the simplest move, which is bishop e2. It is called the classical variation against Najdorf. If white really wanted to prevent e5, he could have gone move like bishop g5, which prevents e5 because now the knight is pinned. White can go knight f5, and well, black cannot play g5 because this knight is pinned now. White could have also gone a move like bishop c4, preventing e5 because again the knight can jump on f5 without allowing d5. Now the bishop controls d5 square as well as good diagonal. So this is how Fischer used to play when he was white and when he faced his favorite defense, Najdorf. Someone played Najdorf against Fischer, Fischer would mostly go bishop c4. Well, here white played bishop e2, the simplest move, and black played the consistent move e5, which is the Najdorf's main idea. He could have played e6, which would have transposed to Scheveningen variation, which is, well, if instead of Najdorf black played e6, this is the Scheveningen variation. So after a6, bishop e2, black can still go e6, but e5 is the main line. White, since he cannot play knight f5, now black will have d5. So white retreated knight b3, and black continued his development. Bishop e7. White played bishop e3. He didn't castle. Castles is the most common move, but bishop e3 is also interesting. And now black also developed his piece bishop e6. Now whenever black plays the Najdorf variation, he has an option with his bishop on c8. Either he can put his bishop on b7, attacking the e4 pawn, or he can play bishop e6, defending the d5 weakness and aiming on the queen side. Well, the move b5 is usually more interesting and more dynamic, but here white very cleverly has placed his pieces in such a manner that b5 can be turned into a weakness, because before black can develop and counterattack white's center, white will go a4, immediately attacking the queen side. Now if black plays b4, which is a very logical move, white can jump knight d5, threatening bishop b6, followed by knight c7 check and capturing the a8 rook. Of course, bishop b6 would attack the queen first, and then the knight would, supported by the bishop, go to c7 and capture the rook. That's white's idea. And if black captures the knight, removes the dangerous knight, it will be replaced with a queen, which is even more dangerous on d5, because now the a8 rook is attacked. And just recall how important the move bishop e3 was, because now the rook cannot come to a7. It will be captured by this bishop. So that was the idea for white when he played bishop e3. He's basically discouraging black from playing b5. Well, after a4, black may have to play something like ba4, but even that is good for white, because white has so many pieces attacking black's queen side. All these squares are weakened. For instance, after castling this type of position, white can go knight a5, attacking the bishop. The rook defends e4, and now all these squares on the queen side are weakened and can be attacked by white's pieces. So that is why after bishop e3, black went for bishop e6. Now here, white, instead of the most normal move or natural looking move, which is castles, he played f4. Well, before going further, let me explain you what would have happened if white castled, black castled, and white played f4. Black would go ef4. Well, this is a very critical decision which black takes. Why? Well, the move f4 in some situations may threaten f5, giving white space on the king side. So f4, ef, rook f4, and now we have a very interesting pawn structure. Lots of colors in the center, you see. The squares marked in green are basically black's strong points. White has a weak pawn on e4. Till this point, the pawns are connected or joined, but after ef, the e4 pawn suddenly becomes lonely. So black can in future pressurize this point, e4 square, and he can also use the e5 square for his piece, most notably a knight or a bishop, because white cannot control the e5 square with his pawns. The same goes for black. White does have a strong point on d5, and black has a weak pawn on d6. So both sides have equal weak squares, and white has to be slightly careful, because I'll show you one small example or some positions from an example. I've taken one example from a game which was played between two Swiss grandmasters from Switzerland, Joe Gallagher and Bogner. This game was played in 2022, so fairly recent game, where the players reached, after a few moves, they reached this position, where white has already made a small error by exchanging a knight on d5. Now black has a strong point on e5. Okay, and the knight sits here. And based on that, black kept on improving his position, and finally we arrived at a situation, the game reached a situation where the knight was replaced with the bishop, and both sides had opposite color bishop. White had a very strong, very grave weakness on dark squares. So here it was black to play. The game ended with black going bishop f4, trying to remove the queen so that black's queen can enter and checkmate white. White went queen d3, black went rook e3, attacking the queen, and when the queen captured this pawn, black finished the game by taking the pawn on h3, check. If white declines the rook sacrifice, then black can checkmate on rook h1. And if white accepts the sacrifice, black will play queen h3, king g1, bishop e3, game over. So this is how black managed to defeat his compatriot, the Swiss Grandmaster Joe Gallagher in one of the games. Now back to the game. Here, instead of castling, white played f4. The reason why white delays castling is that white has the option of castling on the queen side. So first he played f4, and after the exchange of these pawns, the bishop went to f4, putting pressure upon black's d6 pawn. Now again we have the same structure where white's e4 pawn is also lonely, and black has a strong point on e5. So he can place one of his pieces on e5 if allowed, and instead black has a weakness on d6. So let's see who succeeds. Here black played knight c6, developed his piece, and white went queen d2. His idea is to castle long and put pressure on d6. It is here that black made a big mistake. Well, normally black should go either castles, with the idea that whenever white attacks the d6 pawn, black can put his knight on e5, blocking the diagonal. And we have had quite a few games. In one of the games recently, the Indian superstar Arjun Arigaisi, he won a very nice game against Abbasov from Azerbaijan. I won't go into details of that game, but I can show you one particular position which shows that basically the knight on e5 is very strong in attack as well as defense, and it cannot be moved by white's pawns. So just to show you one position which arose from that game, and that is this position. Thanks to the knight, white's attack came to a halt, and now black started counter-attacking. It was black to play in the game where Arjun Erigaisi was black and Nijat Abbasov from Azerbaijan was white. So with black to play, you can pause the video for a while and you can guess what you would play with black in this position. Well, here Arjun, who is very alert and very strong tactically, he played d5, opening this diagonal for the queen. This bishop is unguarded or unsupported. After white took ed, black suddenly played knight d3 check, sacrificing his knight but capturing white's bishop. White played rook d3, queen f4 check, and well, now white's attack is finished and black has a very strong bishop through which he can counter-attack. He played knight c4 with the threat of knight d2 check, and after complications, black managed to win this game. Black has a very good counterplay. These two squares are, these square, the e3 square as well as d2 square, the dark squares are weakened, and black has a dark square bishop, white doesn't have. So this was an example from Arjun Arigaisi Nijat Abbasov game, where black simply castled and relied on the strength of his e5 knight to win the game. There is another simpler solution for black, that he can dissolve his weak pawn by playing d5. Well, when the pawns are exchanged, nobody will have any weakness and the game will be liquidated to an equal endgame. So this is another drawish position which arises had black played d5. But probably black was in a fighting mood and he did not play the normal moves knight e5. Instead he played a5, which is a new move in this position. It's a novelty, and unfortunately the novelty was not a good novelty. Well, the move a5 has an idea. Black aims to go a3, a4, a3, create weakness on the queen side so that white king could be attacked. But unfortunately this move weakens the square b5. So as we have seen repeatedly, every pawn move creates a weakness, and this is one such weakness which white exploited in a very masterly fashion. Nils Grandelius simply centralized his knight. He played knight d4, black exchanged the knights, and black castled. White castled, black went a4 to create some weakness with a3, and white immediately he took the pawn on d6. So while playing a4, basically black is sacrificing a pawn with the aim that black thought that d6 pawn is a weak pawn anyway, and by sacrificing a pawn he is exchanging few pieces, and finally he brought his queen to a5, relying on counterplay on the c file. He's also threatening a3 right now. And why did he went queen a5? Because he's a pawn down, he wants to avoid trade of pieces. So he played queen a5, white is a pawn up, but black has chances to attack. White played a3, stopping black's pawn advance one and for all. Well, black played rook fc8. Now he is threatening to sacrifice an exchange to damage the pawn structure, and after rook c3 the e4 pawn will also be undefended, and basically the king would be weakened. So after rook c8, white played queen g3. It's a very nice move. The queen went back, defending against if rook c3, white will take back with a queen, and white will be an exchange up without sufficient compensation. So this was white's idea when he moved his queen back. Note that if white played a move like rook d3, black can still capture on c3. And well, if white captures with the rook, white would take back the exchange, he would fork the queen and the rook. And if he takes with the pawn, well, the pawn structure is damaged and black does have counterplay. But here white played queen to g3. Yeah. Black went rook c5. He wants to double on the c file, and white calmly he played rook d4, a very nice move, overprotecting e4 and planning to double on the d file. Black went b5. The rook on d4 basically defends against black's idea of playing b4. So he doubled on the d file, and black played rook c8. White is a pawn up. Black is trying to create some counterplay in return for the pawn, but here white played queen d3 with the idea of playing rook d8 check. Well, black is in a desperate situation. He played knight e8. Now the rook d8 is not a check, and he wants to counterplay by playing b4 once the rook is not on d4. So here white very calmly he played queen e3. Well, the queen is eyeing the c5 rook. If the rook is on c8 is removed, white can tactically try to attack the queen. So he went queen e3. One of the ideas is he also takes precautions against bishop c4. So he moved his queen in advance. Black played queen c7. He is tripling on c file. There are 3 pieces lined on the c file. And also black is attacking the h2 pawn. So white played h3. Black also improved his position h6. He made a square for the king to escape in case of back rank check. White played rook d2. So this is a phase where white consolidates his position. He has put all his pieces on right squares. The rook is defending the c2 pawn in case the knight has to move. And now he's ready to take action in the next phase of the game. Black played rook b8. He wants to somehow push the b pawn, and white blocked. He played rook b4. Here black played knight d6 with the idea of creating counterplay by playing knight c4 or bishop c4. Black is still one pawn down, but black is trying to create counterplay. It is white to move and your turn to guess white's next move. What did white play here? Well, there are many moves which white can play. White has a good position, but the best move which wins material was played by Nils, and he simply captured the a4 pawn. It's a very nice combination based on the fact that the queen on c7 is overloaded. If black captures the knight, white would exchange the rooks, move the queen away from defense of c5, and then take back the rook. White will be 2 pawns up in a winning position. So that is why knight a4 is such a nice move. He wins the second pawn. He's attacking the rook. The knight cannot be taken. Black played rook g5, moving the rook away while attacking the g pawn. And now, since the rook is removed, there is no rook hanging on c5 in the final position. So now black is threatening to capture the knight. So black is attacking the knight. Black is attacking the pawn. How does white defend? He played a very calm move, simply defended the pawn without caring about his knight. So when the knight was taken, white exchanged the rooks and pinned the knight on d6. So he's a piece down, but he's winning back the piece with the tactic of pin. Here, how does black defend the knight? White is 2 pawns up. If he wins back the knight, he will remain 2 pawns up. Black first played bishop g4, and then he gave back his piece and then dropped his rook back to g6 to protect the knight. White is a pawn up. White has a more attacking position. So he played e5, pushing the knight back. The knight went to e8, and white went bishop c4. Now he has found a weakness on f7. White wants to capture f7 and checkmate black. Well, here black could have played a move like queen c7 defending f7, but in that case white can pile up more pressure upon f7 by playing rook f2, or he can try to be flashy by playing a move like rook d8. Well, with the idea, when the queen moves away from the defense of f7, white can checkmate on g8. Okay, so that could have been a way the game would have ended, but black did not go queen c7. Instead, he counter-pinned. Now, since white has pinned black's knight once, the knight is trying to teach white a lesson by utilizing the pin and defending f7. If ef6, queen f4 wins for black. So how does white refute this move? It's white to play and win. Well, the final combination in this position is bishop takes f7, a brilliant move. It not only draws the king to a weak square f7, a vulnerable square. Now, having brought the king up, white can go e6 check. It's double attack once again. Check as well as attacking the queen. It's also called discovered attack. So in this fashion, after bishop f7 check, black decided to resign because white is winning material. So that was a very nice game. Although it was a one-sided game, but we did come across some tricks, some tactics, some opening ideas, and some strategies. I hope you liked this video, and if you like this video, please don't forget to share and give a thumbs up to this video. Meet you again next week with another video, another lesson from current games. Be in touch. Goodbye.